So in this video, we're going to wrap up reviewing from Unit 6 for the AP Macro Test, and we're going to look at inflation ideas, just the basics. So inflation is an increase in overall price levels. It's not the increase of one good, not just one good, but overall. And deflation is a decrease in overall price levels. And again, it's not just if the price of chips goes down, it's the price of everything. And then disinflation, and maybe to be clear, when I say everything, I actually don't mean everything in the economy has to go down. And inflation doesn't mean that everything has to go up. It's more like the overall, so the average prices, and we'll kind of talk about how it's calculated here in a moment. Disinflation is a decrease in the rate of inflation. So going from 5%, we'll say positive 5%, to positive 3% would be disinflation. And that gives you kind of the terms that we're going to use here. Nominal wages, just like nominal GDP, are wages in current year prices. Real wages, let me put this here, nominal. Real wages are adjusted for the inflation rate. So we would say if you get a 10% nominal raise, subtract inflation to find the real wage change. What's the nominal interest rate? Same idea here. Nominal rate is without adjusted for inflation, and the real rate is adjusted for inflation. And again, let's say you pay a 7% interest on a loan, subtract inflation to find the real interest rate, is kind of how we think about it. Three costs of inflation, and these are just kind of generic costs to everybody kind of in society rather than like who's helped and who's harmed, which we'll look at in just a second. And one is called menu costs. These are the time, effort, and money spent by firms to update their price lists. So it's time consuming and costly. So we'd say inflation's bad because it primarily falls on firms in terms of menu costs. Another would be shoe leather costs. This is the time, effort, money spent by individuals or households to transact before money is worth less than it is now. So in other words, you're constantly running around, wearing out your shoe leather, hence the name shoe leather. And then the third is unit of account costs. And this is the idea that inflation erodes our ability to know how much things are worth. It's the idea of like, if I told you right now, hey, how much should a bottle of Coca-Cola cost? You probably in your head could roughly estimate, well, if it's a 20 ounce or a 2 liter, it's probably a couple dollars, right? $1 or $2. But if you had really, really high inflation rates, it would be extremely hard for you to do that. You would say, I have no idea, and so it eroded that usefulness of money. And we're going to look back at what money is later, and we'll come back to that phrase. CPI is a measure of inflation, and it's actually specifically one that it focuses on how consumers are affected. So we call it the Consumer Price Index because it's primarily made up of goods and services that consumers buy. So CPI is equal to 100 times a market basket of goods in current year prices divided by the same basket in base year prices. And so it's very similar to GDP deflator because they've performed the same function effectively. They are indexes that allow us to kind of make a judgment about, well, how much price has changed in the whole economy. And we can use the CPI and we could do like a percent change with it to say, here's how much inflation was since the last year. So let's run a quick calculation here. What's the CPI for 2020 if 2019 is the base year? So again, we're going to use the consumption in 2020, right, times the prices or we're going to look at it with the prices today versus the prices of those same goods and services in 2019. So it's 100 times, and then we're going to do the first market basket of the basket in current year prices. So 8 times 20 plus 5 times 10 And that's going to be divided by the 8 guitars times 5 plus 5 drums times 6. And so that is going to give us 100 times, and we have 210 divided by, I think that's 30, and 40 is 70, and so 300. And you notice that this is actually the same calculation that we did in the GDP deflator. When we found the GDP deflator, here it is right here, we did this exact same thing in the table up here, because basically we're calculating them the same way, right? GDP deflator is nominal GDP over real GDP. And so another way to say GDP deflator is the output in current prices divided by current output in base year's prices. And so it's essentially the same idea as what we're doing here when we say the market basket of goods in the current year prices divided by the same basket in the base year prices. So now, and by the way, you can use this CPI value in the same way that we did with GDP deflator to see, did wages go up by enough to help people and that kind of thing. Who's helped, who's harmed? We're just going to quickly say helped or harmed, and then a quick explanation. During unexpected inflation, borrowers are helped because they repay loans at lower real interest rates. And therefore, lenders would be harmed because they get repaid at lower real interest rates, right? So if it's helping one, it's hurting the other. Savers are the same as lenders, so they are harmed because their savings are, the value of their savings, we could maybe be clear here, value of their savings is eroded by inflation. And people on fixed incomes are harmed because their fixed wages do not keep up with inflation. They can't buy as much. So hopefully this helps you with reviewing some of the ideas of inflation, and I'll see you next time.